Roads Brewing Company. We know we have some other folks that are probably stuck in traffic right now bought tickets, which is pretty appropriate for an evening like this. Before I get into some brief remarks about the mayor, I want to introduce Paul Timonelli, the CEO of the Greater Bridgeport Regional Business Council, for some opening remarks on Connecticut CT 20x17.
Thank you, Brett. Good evening. Welcome to Two Roads Brewery. Is this a great spot or what?
Yeah.
You know, I recall a year or two ago making a speech at the other end of this room and talking about how manufacturing has changed such a great deal in the state of Connecticut, and talking about some victories that Mayor Harkins, where's Mayor Harkins? He's here somewhere. Mayor John Harkins, Mayor of Stratford, and Karen Kaiser, who's John's Economic Development Director. I was talking about some victories that both the mayor and Karen have achieved over the last number of years in terms of recruiting new businesses to Stratford. And I said the manufacturing environment has changed a great deal. We're no longer the manufacturing state that we once were, and the kind of businesses that we now recruit to Connecticut and the kind of businesses that are now expanding in Connecticut are not necessarily within the manufacturing arena. And someone said to me after that speech, you know, you're wrong about that. This is actually a manufacturer. We're making a different kind of product, but it is in fact a manufacturer. And John chose the right manufacturer to be here, a brewing company.
Yeah.
Thank you, John, for your forward-thinking, progressive economic growth in our state. Thank you for being here. I'm actually here tonight wearing three hats. As Brett mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of the Bridgeport Regional Business Council. We're a regional membership association, Chamber of Commerce, and we manage 3 chambers of commerce in this region: Stratford, Bridgeport, and Trumbull. I also wear the hat of being on the advisory committee of CT 20x17. And I'm sure everybody in this room knows by now what 20x17 is. It's simple. We have a very direct, very clear mission, and that is Connecticut for far too long has been at the bottom 10 in terms of our measurement of our hospitality to business and our hospitality to economic growth. We are a poor state when it comes to our ability to recruit new businesses here and enable our existing businesses to expand. So our goal is, by the year 2017, which is a very aggressive calendar, to bring Connecticut from the bottom 10 to the top 20. And the things that we need to do to get us there. So we have a program, we have an agenda, we have a legislative agenda, things that need to be done to enable our state to become one of the top 20 states in terms of our hospitality business, to from one of the bottom 10 to one of the top 20. So that's our goal, and I happen to serve on that advisory committee. The third hat that I wear is I happen to be a member of the governor's newly appointed funding committee for transportation investment. As you know, the governor unveiled what we all consider to be a very bold vision for the next 30 years, and that is investing $100 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars over that period of time in transportation infrastructure investment. In all of my conversations with anyone about that issue since the time that the governor unveiled that, I think I've come across no one that disagrees with the objective, and no one that says we can't do this, and no one that says we shouldn't do this. Everyone agrees that one of the chief priorities of this state, in order for us to grow economically, is to invest in our transportation infrastructure, something which has been far neglected for far too long. So I happen to be a member of that committee. There's 9 of us. We met for the first time this morning. Commissioner Rediker gave us a fabulous presentation on what the plan is and what our goals are over the next 4 or 5 months. And our role is to find out where we're going to get the money to invest in that plan. So hold on to your wallets. We're all going to pay for it somehow. But in the end, the return, I believe, will be well worth the investment. So those are the 3 hats I wear. Welcome to Stratford, welcome to Two Roads, and welcome to our discussion about roads, Mike Riley's favorite subject.
Two roads.
Thank you, Paul. Most of you folks in here know Connecticut Mirror is a nonprofit news organization, public policy news organization. We have more journalists now at the state capitol covering public policy than any other news organization in the state. We're also the only news organization in the state that has a dedicated reporter in Washington, D.C. We're in our 6th year. We also accept tax-deductible donations. Thank you very much, in addition to the tickets here. But we have a fantastic staff. We cover not only budget, state house, healthcare, education, environment, D.C., but we're looking to expand in different areas as well. We could have looked at healthcare and education, and we're going to look at that in October and further on down the year. But we felt, in addition to Thursday night's event, which focused on taxes, which was a lively audience that Mike Riley could attest to, he came as a spectator scouting, and Amanda Kennedy, who is our fourth panel, is scouting out what this is all about today. We thought we'd devote 2 panel discussions to transportation, one on roads, and the other one May 19th in Stanford on rail. We also have one May 12th, business climate at Hooker Brewing Company in Hartford, so check us out. You folks didn't come to hear me. You came to hear a panel, drink some beer, taste test. I'm going to turn it over to our Capitol Bureau Chief, Mark Pazniokas, who will introduce our panel, and thanks again for coming out.
Thank you, Brad. I was going to make more of the fact we're doing a transportation forum at 2 roads, and then I realized that our next forum is at the Hooker Brewery, and I didn't know where to go with that. I can tell you the governor will be on that panel, and it is about business in the event. So our panel today, we have Commissioner James Redeker. Commissioner Redeker is one of the few people that Governor Rell and Governor Malloy have something in common with. Governor Rell named him interim commissioner of transportation. Governor Malloy made the job permanent, or at least longer, in August of 2011. Commissioner Redeker comes to Connecticut from New Jersey Transit, so knowing his background in New Jersey, be nice to him, because you never know when the exits to Stratford and off of 95 may close. Next to Commissioner Redeker, we have Senator Tony Boucher of Wilton. Tony is the ranking Republican on the Transportation Committee, and in a not unrelated assignment, she sits on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. So Senator Boucher will be one of those folks who ultimately will vote on how this ambitious plan will or won't get funded. And rounding out our panel,
Rounding?
weighing in at Michael J. Riley he's here because he's the president of the Motor Transport Association of Connecticut, but actually he's also here because he has worked at many levels of politics. My favorite description he's retiring at the end of the year, allegedly. Well, that 5th kid is finally finished with college, right? But there was a little blurb on a website I saw where one of your many jobs was described as you were a budget functionary, is that what you did for Bob Hooley when he was the finance chair?
Oh, I don't know who I allegedly did that.
I don't know. But Mike obviously represents an important constituency when it comes to the state of highways and bridges in Connecticut, and that's the Motor Transport Association. So with that, let's get going. We'll chat for about a half an hour, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So keep in mind if there's something you want to follow up with. This is an opportunity. You do have the Commissioner of Transportation, so feel free to try to nail him down on what he has planned for 95 out the door. I'll start by wishing the DOT a happy birthday. It's 120 years old this year, right?
That's right. That's right. July will be 120 years old. I will not be. We will.
Yes. And it was born out of. Is there other handheld mics?
Yes.
Okay, I see. And it was born out of a bit of chaos about the condition of the roads.
Well, that's been our 120-year history. It's chaos and roads that don't work. But actually, it was born out of a road system that was partly dirt, partly planks, couldn't support commerce, and frankly, the truckers that needed to get through and the cars, the few there were, banned bicyclists from the road because there wasn't enough capacity. They got in the way, and they were a nuisance. And bicyclists happened to be an important component of our society at that point, and after all, Hartford was the center of the birthplace for mass-manufactured bicycles, and they organized. And they mandated that a group get put together to fix this problem and get everyone access to the infrastructure. And that was the birth of the DOT 120 years ago in July. I still think that bicyclists are playing roles like that in pushing policy and forcing us to take a look at mobility across the entire state and across all dimensions and all activity levels. And that's a good thing. And frankly, one of the features in Let's Go CT, which is, I think, a hallmark of the change of the DOT that is now the DOT of Connecticut, and that is, even in a 5-year program, a ramp up toward $100 billion is $100 million for bicycle and pedestrian, urban safety and pedestrian initiatives. That's a marked departure from even when I came a little over 5 years ago. I remember almost my first staff meeting as the Bureau Chief of Public Transportation when we were talking about how the legislature would never get through a bill that forced us to spend 1% on bicycles because it wasn't important. Of course, we're spending a lot more than that. We've exceeded that goal every year. And to place $100 million in 5 years and a significant investment in a 30-year plan on just those systems, I think demonstrates the kind of organization we're becoming and want to become in terms of the role we play throughout society.
Well, now that we got the commissioner to admit that the unofficial slogan of DOT is 120 years of chaos, let's ask the pointed question about, and I'll pose this to the whole panel. And God knows nobody wishes for disaster, but the history of major transportation undertakings in Connecticut and in other parts of the country, they all stem from a disaster that pushes a legislature to pony up a lot of money on some long-term investment. So let's start there. Absent a disaster that nobody wants, how do we generate the public support? How do we sell this 30-year plan to the public at large?
Well, I'll start with this perspective that I don't think, in fact, disasters do anything anymore. You take a look at the bridge collapse in Minneapolis. Nothing happened. A bridge collapsed and there was no more money. We have bridge failures all over the country, and it hasn't led to, at least at the federal level, any policy or any funding change that addresses those needs. And it's very clear that the country's infrastructure is in really poor condition, and we are backorder compared to every other country in investing in infrastructure. Every other country seems to get it. You put money into infrastructure and the economy grows, and it makes that cycle a productive one instead of a negative cycle for the economic profile of a state or a country. So we don't have federal policy that's doing that. At the state level, this program, or this policy plan, if you will, was born from a recognition that, in fact, whether not a bridge collapse, not a road collapse, not a rail collapse, it's not born out of tragedy, but it's born out of recognition, frankly, several years ago, that the state trust fund, or the transportation fund that is now dedicated, at least in terms of policy, toward transportation, will be broke in 3 years. And it won't be able to fund new projects. And so whether we have a bridge collapse or not, we have a crisis. So I guess it's a financial crisis that I'm looking forward to. And anticipating that if we don't fix it, we will be really in trouble in the state of Connecticut. But having said that, the failure would be to have a program go forward that was putting your finger in the dike to plug the leak and only do that and only fund at today's levels, because the standards that we have and the conditions that we have say today's funding levels mean declining condition every single year. We have an aging infrastructure, our bridges and our roads and our railroads are old, they get older, it gets worse, the same amount of money buys less, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I didn't want to see, and no one wanted to see, us hit 2019 and at best plug the hole. So the question was, something I spoke to the governor about probably 4 years ago, is how do we want to organize around this? And at that point, there were many other things that the legislature had to deal with, and he had to deal with, from budgets to healthcare to the economy to other things. And he said, go back, just go back to the office for a while and do something a little bolder than what I had in mind. And so we did, and we started this vision for transportation called Transform CT. And it's been an 18-month process of engagement. Thousands and thousands of people coming in through our website, hundreds and hundreds of people in work groups and stakeholder groups, feeding us ideas on what Connecticut wants. And so this really is selling only what I heard. What do the people of Connecticut want? And that's to the point that we haven't heard anything negative about this plan. It's being sold, it's being pushed forward, but there's not a lot of negative about what's in it because people want what's in it. So we're going to have to face now the challenges of how to pay for it. But I think the real story here is this is what Connecticut wants. They want a state that's easy to move around in, whether you own a car or need one or not. They want a carless society, if that's your choice. They want a stressless society. They want transit that works and highways that work. They want not to worry about things, and they certainly want bicycle and pedestrian systems and trails. And it just comes across so dramatically in what we've heard. So this is, I think, an upside-down plan for Connecticut DOT. For 120 years, we've put plans together that said, we only think we're going to get this much money, and that means we can only do this much. And that means the roads will never get any better or finish connections, but that's our plan. And we put it together every year, and we hold 3 night meetings at some inconvenient time, and 6 people show up, and we adopt the plan, and it never gets better. And so this plan says, after 120 years of doing that, we'll never do that again. We can't do that. We can't afford to do that again. And I think the governor's very fond of saying, we're already spending $4.2 billion a year in lost time and lost fuel costs because we don't fix the problems, and that's just the highway system. That's not delays in buses or trains or anything else. That's lost time, lost wages, lost income, lost everything. So we're already losing. So why not take maybe that amount of money and invest it in the system and get a benefit from that? And so I'll end there, but I think this is not about something failing, and we've got an organization committed to avoid failure at all costs so that bridges don't fail and roads don't fail. And we try very hard to do that. But the plan is about getting way ahead of the curve to best in class, not at the 44th out of 50 in pavement. So similar to 20 and 17, this is being won in 30 years in the way this system and this state can behave and how it can attract people to live and work.
Senator, do you want to address how we rally, how you make this politically possible? And also keep in mind that of the $100 billion, 2/3 of that is to maintain what we have, and then the remaining third is to actually expand capacity. But anyway, go ahead, please.
Well, first I wanted to commend the Connecticut Mirror because they are a very good example of how a nonprofit entity could actually do things well, if not better, in many ways. And I think that also could be true for the way in which government services can be provided as well. And I think the connection between the Transportation Committee and the Finance Committee is very important because in an effort for Connecticut to reach the top 20 in business climate in 2017, one of the most important aspects of that is tax policy. I really firmly believe that tax policy really drives an economy. It's the incentive that keeps businesses here and keeps people here. So that's really key, and we have to balance that tax policy against the other big indicator of a healthy economy, and that is its transportation system. Because the first thing I think that most businesses look at is, will the tax policy support and the regulations support my thriving in Connecticut? Secondarily, can we move goods and services around? Can I get my people back and forth? And what they are looking for is a very safe and dependable transportation system. In that regard, the state has sort of lost its way over the years. And you're right about chaos, because chaos does drive change. We can only remember the Miamis Bridge collapse. We can recall the derailments that killed many people and injured scores of others, not just from old infrastructure, but from poor management and lack of oversight. So much so that there was a clarion cry for the feds to get involved and a cry for new management in Metro North, and luckily that did happen at least. We do have new management that is now really focused on trying to improve a very, very bad situation. And it is true that Connecticut has been reactive pretty much in the past, reactive to crises that have occurred. But now I think that there is a recognition that we have to change things, make things better. And one of my, and individuals on my side of that particularly feel that currently the way in which we spend the current dollars that we have for transportation purposes do not go for the real critical needs that Connecticut has in transportation. There have been scores of hundreds of millions of dollars spent on projects that not everybody thinks should have been the priority. We had a call for fix it first. In other words, fix what's broken first before you embark on something new. So in that way, this 30-year plan, though it spends 2/3 for fixing what's necessary first and another third for future improvements is probably wise at the outset, because we have a lot of ground to cover and to fix. We have, however, put out, because of our strong commitment to try to repair the negative climate, business climate that Connecticut right now has. There's no question, we are at the bottom, 50 out of 50 in job creation. We've only recovered over 70% of the jobs lost when other states are at 150%. They're not only recovered, but they have gained. We are losing resident population is flat, job growth is flat, but the cost of our state government, the cost of services have skyrocketed over 300%. This is a very, very negative dynamic. We have negative outlooks from all of our rating agencies. We're worried all the time that another business is going to leave. Our friends and neighbors are all moving to tax-friendly climate. So when we look at what these critical needs are, and transportation is one of the really top needs outside of education and our vulnerable population as well, we have to look at using our current resources well. And that means that we did provide a plan, a good plan, we hope, that will be looked at by DOT and by our committees that show how we can reprioritize our current general bonding to increase to the addition of the $600 million we currently have in the Special Transportation Fund by nearly $400 to $500 million a year, that will show that we can add about $10 billion more within current bonding capacity without taxing more, without bringing tolls into the discussion. I'm sure we'll have a little conversation about that in a little while. But in doing so, we can also add about $37 billion over 30 years. And if you add federal funding to that, you're really talking about nearly $20 billion over 10 years and about $67 billion over 30 years in a way that does not burden the tax structure of the people in the state and businesses, create a more positive business climate, and address a lot of the different line items that were put in this 30-year plan. And by the way, a lot of those projects have been on the books for a long time, need to be jump-started and moved ahead. And think about not spending money on certain projects in the hundreds of millions of dollars that really haven't produced the kind of outcome, or there wasn't the public demand or commuter demand to make that happen. So I'm hoping that that the direction we go with this, particularly since we have members of the panel that is going to discuss the funding for this plan going forward, to really consider, and I have, by the way, a copy of the plan with me this evening. I'd be happy to hand it over to you so you can look at some of the details, because it is very much detailed. We'll show you that we can accomplish a lot within our current bonding capacity by just changing a few things, reprioritizing, reducing some line items, and keeping the others, the most critical ones, positive moving ahead. So I offer that out to everyone because, as I said, we have to really consider what we do in the way of further taxing our state and our businesses, particularly as that they drive on our roads most consistently.
The DOT started in reaction to a bicycle crowd, but I will tell you, I grew up in small towns, and the best political organization in any small town I ever lived in was the volunteer fire department. No mayor or first selectman in his right mind goes up against the fire department because they got wives and kids and they can do all kinds of mischief. I think that bicyclists still are among the best lobbying groups in the state. They really can turn out the letters, they show up at public hearings, and I think they overinflate their impact upon the state, but nonetheless, as a lobbyist, I tip my hat to them. I will pick up a couple things that have been discussed already, one being the fact that the federal government has really abdicated its responsibility to maintain the interstate highway system that it created back in the 1950s. Congress doesn't have the guts to do what needs to be done. The trucking industry on the national level has suggested to Congress that they ought to increase the federal tax rates for gasoline and diesel fuel. It's the easiest tax to collect. It would be spread across all users equitably. We've suggested a 15-cent increase over 3 years, or over 5 years, depending upon which option you choose. But only Senator Murphy and another senator have had the guts to say this is really what needs to be done. And it's a disappointment to me, but then seeing what we've seen out of Congress of late, it's really not a surprise. I would like to talk a little bit about the Special Transportation Fund, which is the mother of all funds when we talk about transportation issues. The Transportation Fund was created after the Mianus River Bridge collapse. Billy O'Neill and Bill Burns, Jim's predecessor, put together a very ambitious project, $5.5 billion, financed by increases in the fuel tax over the next succeeding several years. They got at the job, they did a lot of that. Essentially that phase is completed, and now we're back to where we were. We don't have the money to do the things that need to be done. And the wish list in this program is great. I mean, if you could do everything that's in there, this state would hum along a lot better than it does. But unfortunately, we say we need more money because the Special Transportation Fund is running out of money. Well, I think you need to look at the Special Transportation Fund, and in my opinion, the first thing we ought to do is sit down and take that whole thing apart and put it back together again in a way that makes sense. The Transportation Fund ought to be the revenue from fuel taxes, registrations, license fees, fines, permits, all highway user fees, transportation-related fees, and fines ought to go into the Special Transportation Fund.
You should see Mike in spandex. It's a sight.
That fine would be very happy.
Oh, the thought of me in spandex turns me off. Anyway, what I want to suggest is that the Transportation Fund doesn't work right now. There are fines that should be going into the Special Transportation Fund that are diverted off into other areas. Would you believe that the fines for speeding and other motor vehicle offenses are used to pay for restitution to victims of crime? That it's shunted off to fund municipal police training? That some of it goes to traumatic brain injury organizations? $15 for every ticket that's written goes to the municipality where it's written, regardless of whether it's written by a local cop or state cop. So those towns that are lucky enough to have a scale house get a pretty good piece of change every year. And now Senator Kennedy has this idea where he's going to put $5 on a registration fee for every motor vehicle license, and that you can have that taken off if you want to. You opt out of it, but if it stays in, it's sent over to DEEP to provide for support for state parks. And that's nuts. If we're going to have a Special Transportation Fund, that it should bring in money from transportation and should spend it on transportation. And while I'm at it, a couple of other points, and then I'll pass the mic down for Redeker to set me straight. The people say that they'll pay tolls and they'll increase their support for transportation projects if they know the money's going to where they want it to go. If it's going to go into bridges and highways and rail, passenger rail, etc. But they don't know that $700 million of that fund is used to pay for personnel costs in the transportation department and the motor vehicle department. So we fund the personnel costs of those two agencies out of the Special Transportation Fund. And then when we get to commuter rail, things like Shoreline East, what people don't understand is, and I'll give you this example then I'll stop. A couple of years ago, my wife and I went from Old Saybrook to New Haven. We wanted to go visit New Haven. So we said, let's take Shoreline East. We never did that. So we got on. It was me and her and the conductor, and there was another guy sitting up front. The conductor comes by and says, it'll be $6 for her and $3 for you. I said, well, why me? He says, because you're elder. So we paid $9 to go from Old Saybrook to New Haven. And then on the way back, we paid the $9 again. So we paid $18. Just out of curiosity, I called my friends at the DOT and said, what's the subsidy on Shoreline East? It's $42 each way for each person. So we're paying $84 a person for me to pay $6 to go from Old Saybrook to New Haven.
That was a weekend, Mike, right?
No, I don't.
No?
No, I don't know.
I don't know.
I remember the trip out, but the trip back. So what I'm suggesting is, this thing leaks out of the bottom. There's all kinds of expenses that come out of this that are dedicated to transit things. And Jim says, well, we can't afford not to do that. I disagree. I think that those things need to be looked at like everything else does in this mix. And before we start doing anything about new revenue sources or tolls or increases in anything else, we need to solidify the fund, what goes in, what goes out, and then pass a constitutional amendment that will protect that fund from future raids, which has been classically done to that fund over the years.
Well, Michael, you've been talking about diverting funds. May I divert this mic for just a moment to continue, and then we'll pass it back on to the commissioner, because that diversion is real, and what Michael has explained is the rating of the special transportation fund, and is one of the reasons that people are a bit suspicious of raising more revenues, raising more fees. And I must correct you, Michael. You know, you're talking about the fact that Connecticut subsidized rail riders. Do you know that Connecticut rail riders pay the most in their rail fares? That in New York, it's subsidized much more. In fact, the DOT in Connecticut is proud that our rail riders pay as much as they do, over 70%, whereas in New York, they only have to pay 50%. The state of New York subsidizes because they understand that mass transit is such a benefit. You get people off the roads, you don't have to maintain the roads to the same degree. It is such a positive. Now, back to the diversion, okay, which is real, and why people are suspicious. For many budget years, they have raided that fund and taken money out to use for other purposes. And did you know that your gas tax is not just one excise tax, which most people, most places, most states have one excise tax. And that is, like in Connecticut, 25 cents. We also add an 8% gross receipts tax on top of it. It's a percentage tax. And it was put in originally at 5% for one purpose only, until this gets paid off. We have this one service we have to pay off. It paid off, but afterwards they got so attached to that additional revenue, they made it permanent. And
Sarah, let me interrupt. Because
Yes.
the time's going to go by quickly, but on topic.
Yes.
So very quickly, for everybody, you know, and Mike, by the way, if you want to bitch about rail more, come to the 4th in the forums. It's in Stamford, and it's just on trains.
Is there beer?
And there's beer. It's the half-full brewery. And that may fit in with Mike's view of the trains, but don't go on a weekday on Metro North. But very quickly, okay, fine. So there's a lot of doubt about where the money will go. Your organization is inviting to be taxed higher with the gas tax. And by the way, the gas tax is, I think, the only tax that Connecticut gets more back from the feds than we pay out. So that's probably one reason why Senator Murphy thinks it's a good idea. But real quick, how do we get past that? I mean, okay, fine. We could sit here for hours and point to all the foibles over the last 30 years, but now we have a plan on the table, and by August or September, we're going to be asked to pay for it. So real quick, how do we get past that doubt?
Well, Mike, did you hear my remarks regarding the alternative plan we've put on the table that is very detailed, has been vetted by the Office of Fiscal Analysis, and that adds nearly $67 billion over 30 years, and with federal funding, really $20 billion in 10 years, where we can fund these projects without going to tolls or gas taxes. Tolls is a very unpopular idea. We're in Stratford. Where do you think that Stratford disaster occurred that took tolls out of Connecticut, never to be returned? In fact, we had such emotional testimony by the survivors of that crash. In fact, just yesterday.
But tolls are, you know, the new technologies. You can do. We could drive through New Jersey paying tolls every minute of the day without slowing down.
Oh, let's debate that, because I take the
Let's
easy
not.
pass to 3 or 4 states. And I will tell you, every state I go to, in fact, last month in Massachusetts, was there a cash lane? Yes. Was there an easy pass? Yes. Was there a drive-through? Yes. But all 3 of them were there, and you'll find every state where that is the case. We do not have hardly any state at all in this country where you can just drive through at normal speed and then you get a bill in the mail. Because there's a sticky wicket, and that's called reciprocity. Another state has agreed that you can come after their residents to pay that bill, and we don't have that with all of the states. It's a national issue. So right now, you're going to have some of the same old stop, pay your tolls, and cash lanes as well. But in addition, that's not the
I
point.
need to stop there.
Okay.
That is not the case at all, and I need to disagree. Modern technology in many states and in all new installations of tolls are completely without delay, without stopping, and you just go through. And that's, if there are tolls ever proposed, that's what we would be looking at. And that's what the studies we're doing to understand the impacts of those from a congestion relief, sustaining capacity, adding capacity would be. No one would ever stop. And that doesn't mean you'd collect every toll without reciprocity. And if you did have reciprocity, you might not collect it all. But at least it wouldn't impede any traffic, and it would be a source that's totally different than what. And to bring back fear from Stratford really isn't the case today. So I think tolls will have to be debated separately. We'd love to have a commission working on it that really will address that for us. But it's not the be-all and end-all either. I think tolls are alone. If you told every road in the state of Connecticut that was interstate and limited access, could only, at best, replace the current gas tax. Right? So it's not the solution to this plan because that's not enough to do this whole plan. So I do think, and I want to state another point, and that is that Mike and I love to spar, but there's a lot of truth in what Mike says about what's important and how we need to take a look at what the fund does. But in this budget year, no money's being taken into the general fund. That's a policy. That's not constitutional. The plan calls for a lockbox to prevent exactly what the senator's calling for. So I think that we're all agreeing on a couple things. We need to take a look at how we manage our money. We need to take a look at how that money gets dedicated for transportation. But we certainly need to take a look at how much it's going to take to do, at a minimum, to sustain what we have. But if we ever want to get better, if we ever want to improve the economy, it's going to take more. So the challenge ahead of us really is still to take a look at more. I'm not so certain that the plan that you put forward actually generates that much money, because it says take it out of other programs. We haven't had that debate yet. So you can keep all taxes even as long as you move them into transportation and it's number one. I guess I'm not going to complain, but that debate still has to go on.
Oh,
right?
but one of those aspects was a $200 million contingency that the governor can spend at will on any pet project. We just cut that back to $100 million. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I think we kept all of the top priorities intact going forward. But we could debate tolls quite a bit, and you made some good points. The bottom line is you can't recover oftentimes the infrastructure costs in it for many years while you're burdening the already overburdened, overtaxed residents with another tax that really wouldn't necessarily generate the cost of putting them in, and you're really disadvantaging our own population, not to mention the businesses that have fleets and so forth. I think it's a very unpopular, politically unpopular bill or idea, and every time someone pays that toll, they're going to remember who put that in. It wasn't necessary. We're such a small state, everyone would be affected by that. The gas tax is much fairer. Everyone that uses the roads equally pays. And I think...
Even if I drive my Prius?
Well, I have a Honda Fit. It gets very high gas mileage. There is no question.
That's my problem. That's where the money's going.
Oh, boy.
Well, it's my understanding that there is a decrease in the sale of gasoline because of efficiencies, but what's really eating up the federal funding is inflation, since they haven't increased the rate since 1991 or 1992, and they haven't indexed it for inflation. It's eaten itself up, so the buying power of what it generates today just isn't there. We know we have to pay more, and we're willing to pay more, but we want to know that we get something for it. If you're going to just put up tolls on existing highways, keep the fuel taxes where they are, and spend it all on expensive transit projects. And by the way, to straighten one thing out, I think that the New Haven to New York rail system is the finest rail system we have in this country, and I think it is a critically important piece of the transportation systems that we have in the state. It has the highest fare box revenue. It is top-notch, and thanks to the DOT for upgrading those cars that were disgusting but are now replaced. Kudos for that. I'm talking about some of the she additions that go on, like the shoreline east for elderly people to travel through town. But well, to go back to tolls, one problem, I've gone to New Hampshire with my Easy Pass at speed. It knows who I am. It takes that money out of my account. When you don't have a transponder in New Hampshire, you have to go through the cash thing. What's being proposed here, as I understand it, is a photo thing where it takes a picture of the front and the back, or the front or the back of the vehicle. We have some problems with that in Canada, where sometimes the tractor is owned by somebody different than owns the trailer, so that we're getting hit with double tolls on some Canadian highways. So that's a problem that has to be fixed. But we want to get something for our money. If you're just going to take tolls and keep the same kind of congestion that we deal with now, that's a non-starter for us. We want to know how this system will deal with the problem of congestion. More throughput, more efficiency, a better system that's more reliable and more safe. Then we're going to pay you. We'll pay you. We'd like to have the option of using the congestion pricing projects that are underway. We'd like to have the option of using the Lexus lane. But just putting it up and saying everybody's got to pay more because it's congested, and it's congested so that everybody will pay more, is not a good deal for us.
You know,
You encouraged by this, Mr. Timpanelli?
let me tell you, the plan is a good plan. There are projects we absolutely need. It will help us if we get it done. But I think this whole discussion about where are we going to find the money, because by the way, that $100 million plan did not have any funding suggestions associated with it. It was punted off to a committee, hopefully, that will see that what the rest of the state and its residents and businesses do see, and that is the state is spending too much money in areas they shouldn't, that is causing us to consider more taxes and more costs for people and businesses. Let's face it, when you're paying 12% raises to 200 people and employees and another $400 million for raises over the next 3 years, there is a whole group of state government that has not yet given the kind of sacrifices that everybody else has to help us get past the recession. We shouldn't be talking about this. We should be talking about the overspending, the bloated cost of government, where fringe benefits have gone from 50% of a salary to 82%.
All right, let's, with all due respect, let's reel it back into the subject. Should we open it to questions? Brent has a microphone.
Questions? In the back? One last note, I was notified that we have until about 7:05. If you still have tickets, feel free.
What time is it?
I got a yes, I got a yes, please, over there. Hold on.
And the commissioner and the senator have not used their tickets yet.
I'll keep my question short. You talked about making the road taxes fair for everyone. You drive a fit, so you're using less gas, and say our fleet is. What fuels are included in this tax? Is natural gas included? And if it's not included, would it be included in the future? Because there's a lot of big companies that are running on natural gas now.
How about electric charging stations?
I don't know, is natural gas covered? No, okay. I mean, it is, you know, we do have two different fuel taxes, and you have some sales taxes, and there's a bunch of other things. But yeah, right now, that's such a small part of the market. It's mainly fleets, I understand, including Connecticut Transit, who wouldn't be paying taxes anyway. But if we ever go that direction, yeah, they're gonna have to figure out how to.
We're going
They
there.
would, yeah,
Okay.
they would do that.
Trucks are going.
All right, so we'll tax Riley on that.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
and Teslas particularly.
Should Connecticut consider privatizing I-95?
Mike's ready. Mike's support.
Where's that
Might be a good time to talk about how the feds you just can't make tolls come and go and.
Well, so privatization, let's talk about public-private partnerships, probably because that's better than privatization, that's along those lines. And there are some ideas where a widened highway or a highway has been privatized, and there are some major flops and failures, and there are some successes there. We today don't have a capacity to do a public-private partnership with legislation that today limits us to only pay for those with a maximum of 25% state dollars, does not allow for availability payments, therefore it has to have a toll on it or a revenue stream to pay for the project. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't consider those and maybe change the rules if we need to, if that makes sense. And I think it would make sense if we found a condition where a major project needed special expertise, major perhaps international expertise to bring outside revenues to fund, we still have to pay back, it's just another loan, but also expertise to build. And there are organizations like that all over this country, in Canada, all over the world, frankly. I think we need to be open to that. Not so much because by itself it makes sense, but because we're trying to think about how to innovate the way we deliver projects, how we fund projects, and how ultimately they get managed. So the concept of a highway that gets fixed or improved, that has a maintenance built into it for someone's responsibility, not mine, that we pay for, frankly, it doesn't really change the cost. It may cost more, but it's a different way of doing it, and it spreads the responsibility, and it might get it done faster, it might get it done cheaper in terms of the actual construction dollar. Any opportunity we have to look at that is something we should be looking at, and I'm committed to doing that. There are a lot of things that are going to have to change in terms of what I can do as an organization, in terms of freedom to do innovative project delivery and innovative financing. But we should be open to it. Some of the recommendations, I hope, coming from the committee will think about just some of those options. But I don't think of them as new money, because it's not. It's just a different way of leveraging money. But I do think of a way of innovating project delivery and perhaps long-term project maintenance. So I'm open to that.
Thank you for that question, because I did look into that. There's some interesting examples and experiments going on throughout the country. You know of some of them. Indiana is one of them. And as was mentioned, some of them have gone bankrupt. Others are still in process. One of the aspects of privatization is that, of course, they have to regain their investment. And most of them have just put in tolls as a way to do so. So here comes the discussion and debate on tolls once again. In some of the states, and one of the difficult aspects of it is that many of those contracts with the state are anywhere from 75 to 99 years long in order to recover. And that locks the state up in inability to really control its destiny with regards to a lot of its major highways. And the one contract I saw was 600 pages and was very much geared towards the investors at the expense of the state. And one of the states found that their tolls doubled from $4 to $9 over a very short period of time, and it locked them in. So, you have to tread carefully there, though I might add that Connecticut did privatize the effort of repairing and restoring, upgrading its rest stops along 95 and the Merritt Parkway, but that was a 30-year contract, and it was a sharing of profits over that time to recover, and I think everyone did very well because it would have taken a very long time to do it.
Let me just jump one quick one. I think that's something, I agree, that has to be on the table. I talked to Paul earlier about a guy that I've heard about who was an expert on this, and he has some horror stories about what has happened in some states that were not doing this as diligently as they should. There's a lot of cash up front that comes to politicians who may be in political trouble, and this becomes the route to success. But the devil is in the details, and there's a lot of details in them. You give up control for an asset of the state of Connecticut, and we're worried about somebody from another country owning our roads that we need to use every day. So, I think it's a healthy skepticism that should be addressed, and I know it will be.
Well, I told you that I really like the idea of privatization with nonprofits doing a lot of services. The AAA does produce or do a lot of really good work with the DMV for you to have an easier process. But philosophically, I will say, even though I'm conservative on many levels, I really do believe the government should be in charge of their roads. It is a general good and a core function, I think, of government, and should not be privatized. It's just a philosophical view.
Other questions?
We have time for one other question in the back.
I know
It's not for me, so I should hand this down right away. Go ahead.
So I wondered if you could talk about some alternative funding mechanisms. I know the state of Oregon has been experimenting with vehicle miles traveled systems where you would be paying per mile traveled on the whole state's roads. There are also things that are, in some places very controversial, like red light cameras, where there's a significant amount of money generated to be used for various things. But is the funding committee looking at these alternative forms of revenue generation?
The funding committee began work today. And an esteemed member of the funding committee is listening to every word that's being said here tonight.
The answer will be yes. We will look at every option in terms of funding ability.
Does anybody want to?
Actually, I don't have a particular, game here. This is really about trying to, we will feed and we will support and we will analyze revenue options and what works and what doesn't for certain types of projects over what period of time for the commission. But, the list is it's not a mystery. The federal government had a funding program when they were trying to reauthorize federal funding. There's a 250-page report about every option under the stars. So that's available. We've got what states have recently done, but I must say, neither the federal report or any of the states that have done something nearby or frankly across the country have done anything other than put their finger in the dike and plug a hole and never deal with the future. So this is really a different challenge, and I admire the folks who said yes to the challenge to join this committee, because it really is a different kind of a challenge. There isn't a state that's been bold. There isn't a state that's been successful. Massachusetts went for 25 cents and got pittance on the 25 cents in terms of real net, gain from an initiative that they started. I think it's important for us to recognize what's at stake and to sell that really hard, because the downside of not investing is so compelling, but the upside is even more compelling. And that's why this is about responding to what the people of Connecticut want and really trying to have them understand what it means. And I must say, that is not easy. A $100 billion plan that we summarized in a couple short pages has thousands and thousands and thousands of things behind it. And trying to peel those away so people can understand what's in it for me and why should I put another dime into the system of some sort is a tough sell. The commission today was asking many questions, some after I left, but I think valid points about, do we have the economic tools to tell people what the return on investment is going to be and why we should spend money? And the answer is we're going to have those for that outcome, because we're going to need more money. And I think it's going to be compelling just to argue what kinds of money and what they should be paying for. And I think to Mike's point, one of the things that we have to debate is the first call on dollars is debt service by law. The second call on dollars is operating costs, and that includes transit subsidies. So either we have an organization called DOT that gets paid for, or we don't, but somehow it's got to be paid for, and it's probably got to get bigger to deliver a $100 billion program. And the transit subsidies are growing, whether we like it or not, and that's an important mobility issue. So when you put it all together, it's bigger. And so we really need to work together collectively about what this vision means to people and see just how much we can raise to fund it. And frankly, at that point, we can size and shape and deliver this program. And really what the DOT wants to do and what it wants to be is not the planner, not the funder, not the people that decide how to do this funding strategy, but rather the agent of delivering the program and being responsive to customers. And I think that's a model that we embrace is what our role really is.
I want to thank Michael Grant.
On the total miles driven, because we did.
Absolutely.
Brett,
Quick answer.
I have to live with Senator Boucher.
You
So.
do, you
Okay.
do.
Everybody else has 10 minutes over there, but please, Senator.
I just wanted to answer directly your question about total miles driven and also red light cameras, because the Transportation Committee did debate both of those. They had testimony on them. And many of the cities want the red light cameras, but they've run it, and New Jersey had them as well, but they took them out. They ran into some constitutional issues, people taking them to court about those issues. So there's some legal issues around that has precluded it, but total miles driven is something that has been talked about. The one concern, and I know Mike Riley probably has this too, is that people that are on the road with fleets or trucks over time will pay a lot more, and will that translate into higher cost of goods and services?